Welcome to Infinite Models. If you like building aircraft, any type of armor, how about prehistoric or current wildlife? Autos of all shapes and sizes and genres, seafaring subjects of all types, and figures, vignettes, and dioramas, then this group was made for you.
Again, my grandpa used to tell us that, the irony is that when my grandpa came back from his various combat tours, he didn't talk about things a lot. And I would hear him relate tales to other people when I was a boy. And then I would ask my dad about them, and my dad would kind of re-relate them. Well, one of them I found really fascinating. It really shows just how sneaky our enemies can be. The 13th Bomb Squadron, and even the 452nd, and all of those that were flying Invaders, and the B-57s, there was a night intruder units. A lot of them flew at night, flying interdiction to break North Korean, the Chinese and North Korean supply lines. And the vehicles, mainly trucks, some Jeeps, they would try to travel by night because by day they were just visible targets, and the NATO owned the air, and our close air support capabilities were incredible. And so a lot of any of the movements that took place during the day were very vulnerable to aerial attack. And so the communists took to moving things by night. Well, even moving at night, you had to have some vehicles with headlights, right? You can't just go driving around in the dark. So they would have the lead of a convoy, and maybe intermittently some of the vehicles would have lights on, and everybody would have to rely on those very few vehicles for those lights. But it kept it so that they were harder to spot from the air, especially if you were, high in the air. It was hard to see that stuff. Well, early in the war, before they kind of learned some of these things, they would drive, and all of them had their headlights on. And to an airplane flying at night, all you would see is, a whole bunch of lights in parallel, kind of bouncing along the rough terrain. They didn't have a whole lot of roads. And so they'd all just be kind of bouncing along in a valley or something, trying to use, hide within the walls of the valley down at the bottom to move their supplies through by night. And so the Invaders, they took to doing some lower level reconnaissance and search missions. And when they would see all of those bouncing lights, they would line up, and remember when I described to you killing a train, they would come in perpendicular and hit the engine, and then they'd go in perpendicular and hit the caboose. And once they had both ends of the train knocked out, then they would start raking it from nose to tail to destroy everything. But the first passes were always perpendicular. Well, where it came to convoys, because a convoy is far more agile than a train is. Train has to stick to tracks, and even a convoy of vehicles, if you're in rough terrain, bottom of a valley, you can turn, and they can all start to break up, and making a straight pass, you don't have many targets lined up. And so when they went after vehicle convoys, whenever they saw one, the first passes were always along the length of the convoy, and they would try to do them from the rear, so that they would, catch them before they started scattering, because some guys can see the airplanes coming down out of the sky, approaching them from the front. Well, the communists started figuring this out. And after they lost a few convoys that were strafed because all the headlights were on, then they started dimming the headlights, and then they started, only a few of them would have headlights on. Well, then they started setting traps. And my grandpa described flying into one of those traps once. And here's why the cartoon reminded me of it. In the cartoon, you had a guy stepping out of a 8-gun nose A-26, and he was saying, and basically the underside of his airplane was all shot up and beat to hell. And he was going, man, I was really low on that thing, and they still just eating me up. And his buddy says something like, you got to go low to get through there. And he says, yeah, it was like at 50 feet. And he goes, no, you really need to be lower than that. And the reason that gave Jonathan such a chuckle is because my grandpa did that regularly and still came home with secondary explosions in the belly of his airplane, including on that one mission, the bell from the nose of a North Korean train. So they really did go quite low. So here they were. My grandpa was flying a mission. He was -1, the lead of a 2-ship formation, and they saw the dangling, the bouncing lights in the bottom of this valley. And so they flew in a wide arcing circle around it to ascertain number of vehicles, direction of movement, and stuff like that. And then they decided that from the tail forward strafing run, they would have to, move around and come in from behind, and they were going to strafe this convoy. So they moved around, they lined up, and they kind of do a wing over and head down in. They roll out at the bottom and bring the nose up and line up on the afterglow, if you will, of the vehicle headlights. And just as they get within firing range and start firing, all hell broke loose. The communists were waiting for them. They had set a trap. And here's what they did. Down in that valley, they had erected a whole bunch of poles. And the poles were all connected by ropes. And then some of those had ropes that went out to the side. And they put lights on top of all those poles. And they were connected to batteries. And then at night, they would cut those lights on with the batteries. And they had guys on the sides pulling on these ropes and jiggling all this stuff around. So it looked like vehicles bouncing along through the floor of the valley from 1,000 feet in the air. Well, on that, since all these were down in the valley, these rows of lights up on the sidewalls of the hills, they put a whole bunch of anti-aircraft artillery emplacements pointed down into the valley. Some aftward, some forward, and some straight into the valley. But both sides were lined with anti-aircraft guns. And when they rolled in and came out and they started their attack run, all the anti-aircraft batteries started lighting up. And the planes went through there and they were getting chewed on really, really hard. And so after that, the missions, they started telling them, you need to make 2 arcs instead of 1. The first arc would be to try to ascertain direction, movement of travel, the tail to the nose, kind of orientation of the convoy. And the second arc was to really take another look, find a prominent point on the ground, whether it was an outcropping or rocks or something. And when you come around on the second arc, see if the lights had advanced in relationship to that point that you're calling out on the ground. Because if they haven't advanced, it may look like they're moving and moving slowly, but they're really not moving. It may be a trap. And so they started flying counter-air missions where they would send 3 invaders out, and the 3 would make the 2 arcs. And if they determined it was a trap, the first one would do a wing over and come down like he was rolling in. And as he made his approach to the valley, he would suddenly pull up. Well, the other 2 had done wing overs in delay behind him, and they would roll in and rock up and skim the walls, strafing for all of the anti-aircraft guns. It just became the whole war became nothing but a cat and mouse game on how to kill the other. And so that was one of the stories he shared, going from 2-ship formations with a lead and a follow-on to 3-ship formations with a decoy and anti-aircraft emplacement aircraft strafing the sides of the hills. You just never really knew. It was crazy. People come up with, they really invent incredible ways to kill each other. And that was one of the stories he shared when I was growing up. It always stuck with me, that the things that those guys had to do and the lessons learned, because the first guy through, he got raked apart by the anti-aircraft artillery sitting up in the sides of the hills, pointed right down in the valley. And when you're getting fired on, there's not a lot of maneuvering you can do to avoid getting hit. Left or right, you're right into the side of the hill, and they win anyway. The only thing you can do is pull up. And are you pulling up and coming off of a convoy and destroying resupplies that may be needed elsewhere for the ground war, which is really everything you're trying to support. It drove the pilots to really almost overthink a lot of their engagements because of the way that
We hope you have enjoyed this Infinite Models presentation.